The reading this morning comes from the Australian Government website. Why do we need to talk to young people about consent? It's important that young people having their very first relationship or sexual experiences know exactly what consent is about. The best thing we adults can do is get our own heads around consent. We can do this by engaging those around us on the topic, your partner, friends, other parents and carers, and older family members. When we have the same understanding of consent, we offer better support to the young people in our lives. Before we can talk about consent, we need to know what it is. Sexual consent relates to sexual activities. It is a free and voluntary and informed agreement between people to participate in a sexual act. This agreement is only present when these people mutually and genuinely want to engage and actively make sure their partner does too. This means that there's only consent to an activity if everyone is involved, agrees with each other to take part, really wants it to take part, checks with each other, shows or says that they want to take part in clear and open ways. And I could go on reading. I find it fascinating that that is on the Australian Government website. And it is a reaction and a response to the reality that we as a culture have moved since the 50s and 60s from a very, conservative understanding of how sexual activity should be expressed to essentially a free-for-all. And now it's taken decades, but the society is recognising actually a free-for-all isn't free and it isn't for all. And so let me come to the Bible reading for today. Matthew chapter 19, beginning at verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying these things, he left Galilee and went into the region of Judea to the other side of the Jordan. Large crowds followed him and he healed them there. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife and for any and every reason?" "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, 'For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate.' Why then," they asked, "did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away?" Jesus replied, "Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery." The disciples said to him, "If this is the situation between a husband and a wife, it is better not to marry." Jesus replied, "Not everyone can accept this word, but only those to whom it has been given. For there are eunuchs who are born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it." I feel like I'm in a cartoon. And you know, there's a cartoon and there's a cartoon character is stepping through a minefield. You know, and they're going, and they don't blow up. Whew. Some said it thundered. I feel like maybe I'm going to detonate. So obviously I'm talking about marriage, right? And when the Pharisees asked Jesus this question, is it okay for anyone to divorce for any reason? They were trying to set him up. Because Jesus was in the place which was ruled by Herod, in the same place where John had ministered, and where God had called out him for divorcing his wife and marrying someone else, and that had ended up getting John with his head cut off. And so here the Pharisees aren't really being genuine in their question. They're trying to trick Jesus. They're trying to get him to say something that will end up with his head getting cut off. And marriage is a bit like that, if we try and want to think about starting to talk about it, not only for cultural reasons, but for deeply personal reasons. Because some of us will be thinking, we're talking about marriage, like that's just been a total mess in my life. Or we're talking about marriage, I wish I was married, and I haven't had a chance, or it hasn't worked out. Or maybe it's, I am married, and I wish I wasn't. And so I am aware that there are all of these things. When I read out this reading and we start to raise this topic, I'm aware that there are all of these different, very personal things that are going on in your lives. And maybe it's not just for yourself, but what you saw in your parents, or what you've seen in your siblings, or what's going on in your people next to you, or whatever else. And so let me tell you that I am trying really hard not to blow up this morning. And so also, let me say, I'm not going to try and address all of the nuances of what you do in your specific circumstance. Right? And I'm not going to try and lay out a prescription, you must do X, Y, and Z to be a faithful Christian. I'm not going to do that either. But I do want to try and ground us in what the Bible teaches us about marriage. But I also want you to know that if you read the Bible, you don't have to read very many pages before you come across people that stuff up their marriages and that God still uses. Or people that are put in very difficult positions and God still uses. And so I want you to hear from me this morning that there is grace and not condemnation. Just because you think, I'm not conforming to what you're supposed to, it's not the end of the world. So please hear me with that. I'm not going to address all of the other hot button issues that are necessarily around the issue of marriage in our society today. We can do that another time and maybe another forum. But what I wanted to do is, let's look at when Jesus was faced with the issue, what did he actually teach? And so if you like, this is a Jesus understanding of marriage, because marriage is pervasive. Almost every culture has some form of marriage. Now, there are some that don't, and you can go and Google them and find out. But out of the vast number of cultures that have existed and exist today, almost all of them, the vast majority of them, have marriage of some sort. And that's not surprising, because this is what Jesus said. At the beginning, the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. And so I just want to draw out from this some main points about marriage that Jesus is teaching here. And he's quoting from Genesis, and he's adding a bit on. And he's saying this, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother. And so the first part of when a marriage happens is that there is a leaving that takes place. And in our culture, that sort of can be a bit diluted for us. Because in our culture, often we leave home before we leave to get married. And so I'm already out living in my own apartment or whatever else, maybe with friends, maybe by myself, maybe with my partner or whatever else. And so the sense of leaving has already happened to some degree. And so, if you like, some decision about leaving has been a communal thing that's been decided, but it's only, it hasn't included a communal decision about leaving to go where in terms of marriage. But let's be really clear here is that when this marriage is going to happen, there is a leaving that needs to take place. And some of you may be aware of situations where a person has left their parents but has not really left their parents. And their parents, or maybe one of them, continues to have undue influence and control. But the first thing about Christian marriage, or Jesus teaching about marriage, is that there is a leaving. And so parents need to do a releasing. And being united to his wife. And this is like adhering. So we've got the leaving, and now we've got the adhering. It's like the gluing together or the committing together. And so there is a covenantal thing. There's covenantal overtones or undertones in this word as well from the Old Testament. So it's not just a leaving, but it's also in the old language, because of cleaving. There is a joining together in covenantal commitment. And that's reflected in the way we do marriage ceremonies, that there is a leaving and there is a cleaving. And then out of that, there is sexual union. And the two will become one flesh. And that's the Jesus' wisdom for things. Now, there's many circumstances where it doesn't quite happen like that, right? And that's not like the unforgivable sin. But if we want to listen to what Jesus teaches us about marriage, there is this leaving, there's this cleaving, and then there's this union. Yeah. But I find it interesting here, because Jesus goes on to add something. So the two are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. You know, there's many people today who are having wedding ceremonies and civil wedding ceremonies, right? Guess what? Whether they know it or not, there is a joining that God is involved in doing in that place, in that moment, in that registry office, or in that park, or wherever it is. Because marriage is God's idea, and God wants marriages to succeed. And it's saying here that when there is a marriage happening, because it's not just a Christian marriage, it's like marriage preceded Christianity. Marriage preceded Judaism. Marriage preceded the Ten Commandments. It's a worldwide phenomenon, right? It's a creation-based thing. And here Jesus is teaching us that it's so important. Whether you know that Jesus exists or not, whether you believe that God exists or not, there is a joining together that God says, yes, that's good. That's a good thing that's happening. I'm involved with it. And when we get married and do marriages in Christian ceremonies, we're saying we are recognizing that. We are embracing that fact. Yes, it is true. And God, we know you're here, and we're actively wanting to cooperate with you in this process. And so the framework for marriage from a Christian perspective is leaving, joining, and union. And then God working together with the couple in that. So a Christian understanding of marriage is grounded in creation. But it's not just ground in creation. There was another time when, like, people were always trying to catch Jesus out and set him curly questions. But every time, Jesus saw through what they were trying to do. And this isn't so much a direct teaching about marriage, but it sort of is. And there's a few different versions for it, but I want to turn to the one in Luke chapter 20, beginning at verse 27. And the Sadducees come to, because the Sadducees don't believe in resurrection. And they came to Jesus and said, Moses is right that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now, it's not exactly that. If you go back and read it in Deuteronomy, it's if the brother is living with you, then they need to do this. And there's this. Then he goes on to say, well, the first brother dies, and so the woman marries the second brother, and then the second brother dies, and so the woman marries. Like they take it to the nth degree to really try and, exaggerate the whole thing. Now, the whole point of what's sometimes called levirate marriage back then was that, like, the nation of Israel was just starting. They were just going to be moving into the promised land, and everybody was going to get their own bit of land. And part of the point of this was that family line didn't lose their property. It didn't just get amalgamated in something else. I mean, it's sort of weird today, but, you know, for those of you who are alive 20 years ago and a bit after when Mary became Princess Mary and married, is it Frederick or whatever? Like, she had to do fertility testing. Because for kings and queens, being able to make sure you have offspring to continue the kingdom or the queendom is vitally important. And so this is sort of in that vein. It's actually about maintaining private property rights. But then there's this complexion thing. Well, you know, God isn't into polygamy, but if the woman has married these 7 different people and they get to heaven, what's the story? And so Jesus says this. The people of this age marry and are given in marriage. But to those who are considered worthy of taking part in the age to come and in the resurrection from the dead will neither marry nor be given in marriage, and they can no longer die, for they are like the angels. They are God's children, since they are children of the resurrection. And so a Christian understanding of marriage is framed by creation, but also by resurrection. You know, sometimes marriage is portrayed as the be-all and end-all, the most important thing. And if you're outside of getting married, then you're somehow a lesser person or whatever else. But here Jesus says, well, actually, marriage is a temporary thing. In the age to come, it'll be somehow different. Now, he doesn't, unfortunately for us, he doesn't actually give much details about that, right? But he says that in the age to come, it won't be about that. Maybe because there'll be no more death, there'll be no more need for procreation. But I think possibly also, Jesus prayed in John 17 that we would be one with him and the Father. You see, marriage is an imperfect human expression of, and a way of, in some ways, meeting an innate desire for joining and for unity and deep, intimate relationship with another person. And our future is to have that relationship with God. So at best, marriage points to a deeper truth. And that's the deeper truth that's available to every one of us, whether we're married, whether we're unmarried, whether we're divorced, whether we're in any sort of confusing or imperfect situation. God is offering to us a unity with him that goes beyond anything that we can actually experience at a human level. And so we shouldn't hold up marriage as almost like an idol. Because those of us who don't get married can then start to feel, well, I'm missing out. Yeah? Or those of us that used to be married and aren't married anymore, what's the story? So we've talked about all of that before. But so Christianity has this really interesting framing of marriage. Yes, it's grounded in creation. But yes, we also live in the light of the resurrection to which we are heading. And we need to keep both. So I reckon, and maybe we should do it. You know, like we have every year in church, well, in our culture, we have Mother's Day and we have Father's Day. I reckon we should also have Singles Day. To affirm that it's good and okay to be single. But sometimes people feel like they're a second-class citizen if they are. That's what I'm saying. Right? Now, there's that deep desire for connection, and we've talked about that. We have that with God, being married is a good thing and all that sort of stuff. But we also, I think, need to affirm that if you're not single, that if you're not married and you are single, we want to honour that too. Whether it's by choice or whether it's by circumstance, we should honour that. I was speaking with a friend when we were on a trip recently, and she's single, and obviously I'm not. And so we got into the conversation of how people experience that in church. And so I asked, well, what are some of the ways in which it makes you feel excluded or whatever? And one of them was the celebrating of people getting married. Now, I want to celebrate the fact that Georgie's getting married in a couple of Saturdays' time. Woohoo! But I also want to celebrate people who choose to or have to live a life of faithful singleness. And I want to make sure that those of you who are like that feel included in our church. And I'm giving you an invitation now to come and tell me quietly or whatever other way you want to, hey, David, when this happens in church, I feel excluded. I don't want that to be your experience. You know, like it's not exactly the same, but James says true religion is this, to look after widows and orphans in their distress, i.e. people that aren't in normal family relationships. We want to make sure you are looked after and you're experiencing love and belonging. And so if we are doing things that aren't doing that for you, I want to know. Because it's not deliberate, but it probably happens just because I'm human and fallible and all of those sorts of things. And so I would hope that we are a church that affirms that. You see, that's actually deeply embedded in the reality of God, because the Father, Son and Spirit have lived in eternal unity forever. And yet Jesus came and lived a single life. So in the very nature of God, it affirms, if you like, both the unity but also the singleness. Sometimes there can be family and cultural pressure to get married. And some of you may be experiencing that even now. And we don't have time to go through it this morning, but 1 Corinthians chapter 7 is if you read all of 1 Corinthians, actually the end of chapter 6, because it again talks about sexual immorality, but it frames it in the light of we shouldn't engage in it because we are, our bodies are made for the Lord, and because there's resurrection and power in Jesus' life, there's resurrection and power in our life, we should not engage in sexual immorality for that. And because our bodies are holy things. But then it goes on in Paul in a nuanced conversation about if we're engaged, should we get married, shouldn't we get married, all these sorts of things. And at one point he says, I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs. How can he please the Lord? But a married man is concerned about the affairs of the world. How can he please his wife? And his interest is diverted. And an unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world. How can she please her husband? I'm saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, so that you might live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. So here's the thing. Whether you're married or whether you're unmarried, the deepest thing has got to be, am I living to please God rather than just myself? Is my marital status impacting on my devotion to Jesus? Because after all, Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God. But this passage is also interesting because it talks earlier on in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians, and this is talking about sexual relationships within marriage. Do not deprive each other except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time. And before that it says, the husband should fulfill his marital duties to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, The husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Therefore, do not deprive each other except perhaps by mutual consent for a time, for prayer mainly. See, consent is built in there as well. Consent is not a new idea. Consent was there at the beginning where people are leaving a family and going to start a new family. But it doesn't just end when the marriage certificate is signed and the bride and groom have kissed and they've thrown the confetti everywhere, much to the angst of the person who has to clean up the church afterwards. And this is a shocking thing that Paul is saying. We take it for granted, but in Roman times, this is what some of the people writing about it said. Demosthenes, we keep mistresses for pleasure, concubines for our day-to-day bodily needs, and we have wives to produce legitimate children and serve as trustworthy guardians of our homes. Or Horace, if your groin is swelling and a housemaid or a slave boy is at hand, arousing constant desire, do you prefer to burst with tension? Not me. I enjoy love that is available and easy. So this is the culture that Christianity came into a highly patriarchal culture where women and slaves did not have agency. And here Paul is saying, you have agency. And in fact, it actually addresses the whole idea of hierarchy. Hierarchy in the Bible appeared after the fall. Before the fall, God commissioned humans to rule over the world, but not each other. Hear me really clearly. It was never God's intention for one human being to rule over, be hierarchical over another. Now, some Christians desiring to get back to a pre-sexual revolution sort of thing, saying, well, what we need to do is go back to the good old days, and what they actually mean is going back to a patriarchy. And there is some teaching floating around that says there's God's order. You've got the Father, you've got the Son, you've got the Spirit, you've got the husband who provides covering for the wife, who provides covering for the kids, and there's some sort of hierarchy. Let me tell you, that is not biblical. Jesus' teaching about power says, in the Gentiles, they lord it over one another. And it says in Mark and Luke and Matthew, that shall not be amongst you. No lording it over anybody else. No emperor over a normal person. No husband over a wife. No parent over a child. Not lording it over. That should not be the way it is amongst you Christians. And no sort of hierarchy either, because it says in Ephesians that Christ has raised us and seated us with Christ in heavenly realms. Jesus is sitting on his heavenly throne. He says, come on everybody up here and sit next to me, not below me. So if it's incompatible with that idea, saying, well, I'm sitting next to Jesus, but actually I want you to sit below me. In some sort. No, Jesus seated that person next to him. End of story. Pretty passionate then, didn't I? Because there is a deep thing actually that some of us get significance from having control over someone else. We have some sense of our own power or importance when we get to push someone else down. And that's part of the way our human nature has been distorted by sin. God wants us to rule over this world, but he doesn't want us to rule over others. God wants us to get pleasure out of gardening and constructing big bridges and developing computers and drugs that save people's lives. And get the sense of achievement out of producing good in this world rather than dominating other people in this world. And so in Jesus' teaching, he said, when the disciples said it's better not to get married if that's such a high bar about divorce, and Jesus said, well, that's your choice. And in 1 Corinthians 7, Paul reaffirms people's choice. In a culture where you may not feel like you have agency, Paul reaffirms you have agency about whether to get married or not. So God created marriage. But it points at a deeper level to our future life with resurrection life with Jesus. So it's not the be-all and end-all. It involves leaving and joining before the sexual activity. And consent continues afterwards. But you have a place of belonging if you're not married. And there is grace for each of us, whatever our status. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you created us for relationship with each other, but most deeply with you. And God, I pray for us in our individual circumstances, God, with our families of origin, with all of the complexities of the things we've experienced in our lives. God, that we would experience your grace for us where we are right now. Lord, that you would bring healing where there is hurt, reconciliation where there is division, wisdom when hard decisions need to be made. Lord, give us your wisdom. Give us your sensitivity and grace. Individually, but also as a community, God. Help us to be an inclusive and loving family. And Lord, for those of us who are married, I pray that you would speak into our lives about how our marriages can be better, about how we can navigate the challenges of that. For those of us who aren't married, Lord, we pray that we ask that you would speak to our deepest needs and guide and direct us and help us to see that there is a full and fulfilling life available in you no matter what our status. Most of all, God, help all of us, we pray. Amen. Let's finish with our last song, Everyone Needs Compassion. A love that's never failing. Our God is mighty to save, and we serve a God of resurrection.